Speaker, I'm delighted to be talking to the Sentencing and Parole Reform Bill in the second reading, and I'd just like to acknowledge my Select Committee colleagues for the excellent work that they did on this bill. I'd also like to acknowledge the Minister, advisers, PCO and Select Committee staff who also did an excellent job through assisting the process. I'd just like to point out to the previous Speaker that in January 2010 it was the Minister of Police and Corrections who took over the responsibility for the bill for the remaining parliamentary stages due to the significant roles that the New Zealand Police and Department of Corrections have in implementing the changes to the bill. And so I'd just like to correct the previous Speaker that police were actually advisers, not justice, as the previous Speaker suggested, and that there were no corrections. The comments about corrections were also incorrect. And so it was particularly important for police officials to advise the Select Committee, and this was because the threshold for the regime was to be changed from a qualifying sentence to a conviction for a relevant offence. And this meant that the police discretion as to what charges were laid and the charging process itself would be critical to the operational elements of the new legislation, and so that under the new regime all prosecutions involving charges that qualify for stage 3 of the regime will be referred to the Crown Solicitor for peer review, either pre-charge where circumstances allow or by the second appearance. And this provides an assurance that the appropriate charges will be laid in these cases. Now, I thought it was pertinent to actually point those things out to the previous Speaker because she seems to have been somewhat incorrect in some of the things that she was saying. And she also spoke about the Bill of Rights, and I recall that another bill that she spoke to in regard to and mentioned the Bill of Rights and suggested that we have a moral obligation to allow prisoners in this case to be able to vote. Well, I would suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, that in the first instance the moral obligation is on the individual not to commit a crime. And so this government is taking action, yes, on finding what the drivers are of crime and addressing those, but we're also taking action to deal to those perpetrators of crime who do not take the responsibility that they have to not commit a crime. And I'd also like to talk about how many offenders are likely to be affected, because those were some other issues that were raised by the previous Speaker. The impact on the New Zealand prison population is estimated at 56 beds after 5 years, 56 beds after 5 years, 142 after 10, and 288 after 20 years at the most. And these figures are based on 1980 to 2008 figures and do not factor in the deterrent effect of the new policy. And one must remember that there is a deterrent effect in the policy such as this, and as such they are expected to be conservative, so it may indeed be much lower. And you must also remember the victims in all of these crimes, and this goes some way to meeting the needs of victims. So how much is this policy going to cost? Well, this was again mentioned by the previous Speaker. So after 5 years, the operating cost is estimated to be $5.1 million per year, with a total capital cost of $22.4 million. And so that's something that the previous Speaker might like to be cognizant of. But we're certainly not soft on crime, not like the previous Speaker in the opposition, because we believe that people have a moral obligation not to commit crime in the first place, because once they commit a crime, they give up their rights. That's the consequence of committing a crime. They give up those rights. And so they are subject to the full effect of the law. And so how will the bill work? This bill creates a 3-stage regime that will improve public safety, because that's the primary objective for sentencing, parole and bail should be driven by the need to put public safety first. That's the primary driver, and for giving some consideration to victims. I love the comments from the opposition, who did nothing in 9 long years and now start to get all soft and touchy-feely. So we're committed to taking the tough steps needed to tackle violent crime and make people feel safer in their homes and on the streets, and I think that's incredibly important. And do you know that the public are feeling that already? That's exactly what they asked for, and that's what we're giving them. So we're serious about better meeting the needs of victims and putting victims at the heart of our justice system, rather than putting the criminals at the heart of the justice system, as the previous speaker seemed to do. We believe that there's a moral obligation on people not to commit crime, and once they do that, they relinquish that moral obligation, they relinquish their rights. So at stage 1, an offender who is convicted of a serious violent offence will be sentenced as normal, but will be warned, as has already been previously said, both verbally and in writing, that they are on the first rung of the regime, and what will happen if they are convicted of another serious violent offence in the future. So they are told at offence 1, at the first strike, they are told what the likely consequences are going to be if they don't take control of themselves and take some responsibility for their behaviours. Then at stage 2, an offender who is convicted for a second time of a serious violent offence, because this is all about serious violence offences, and who has previously received a warning, will be sentenced as normal, but will be required to serve any sentence of imprisonment imposed by the court without parole. So that second offence will be served without parole. And that's a good job, absolutely. My colleague says good job, and I'm sure most people will be saying out there, good job. Why should they get parole? They've already been warned at the first offence. They've been told what the consequences will be. Why should they suddenly get parole on a second offence? They didn't take responsibility for their actions, so they must wear the consequences. So at stage 3, an offender who is convicted for a third time of a serious violent offence and has previously received a final warning at stage 2 must receive the maximum prison sentence for that offence and serve that sentence in full without parole. And that's as it should be. If they're going to do the crime, they need to do the time. They need to think more about their behaviours.